This table I picked up for $7.50. I couldn't pass it up. The top is really beat up, but for the price, I knew that I could make this look cute, and if I don't sell it, it will be a great little work table for me. It's not solid wood, so I don't know how much of this I'll be able to sand off before going through the vineyard top, but I know I can paint it and make it cute. And I also have one other table that I'm going to do a quick refinish, and I'll share that with you. And then at the end, I will give you a tour of my last vintage market. Welcome to Soul Station. The first thing that I did was sand the top. This is a laminated wood top, and so I had to be careful and do it lightly. There were burn marks and a lot of other things on here that I wanted to kind of smooth out a little bit so the paint wasn't quite so rough. And then I added a coat of shellac to the top so that I didn't have any bleed through into my paint. Once the shellac was dry, I started painting, and the color I'm using here is a French blue color. It's called French Toile, and it's just a really soft light blue with a gray undertone. I will put a link to the products that I'm using in this video in the description box below. So here it is after 2 coats of paint. My plan is to give this some really good aged patina, and so I've got a few steps left to do.
There can't be no light if darkness don't exist. He never left my side. He showed me the way out of all the storms raging at the sea. He gave me back my life. I owe him everything. Rejoice, rejoice, rejoice in the name of the Lord forever and always.
Using a foam sanding block, I am just smoothing out the surface on the top, and then I switched to a coarser grit sanding block so that I could distress the edges. And then I switched to my sander just to get the job done faster and to be easier on my hands. There is a difference when you're working with latex paint versus chalk or a clay-based paint. The latex paint is a lot harder to distress, so you have to work it a lot harder using sandpaper. Once I had the table distressed in all the places that I wanted, I am using the same paint and I'm making a paint wash. I did about 1 part paint to about 3 parts water. Using a paintbrush, I'm just lightly brushing on my paint wash over the entire tabletop. I didn't do this part on the bottom, just on the top of the table. The tabletop was really beat up, and so my goal is to just give it a layered look to kind of camouflage all of the imperfections that were there. But then when I sanded it, I also wanted to bring out some of the lines that were there in the lamination that kind of gave it that appearance of a plank look. So I'm hoping that by layering on the paint with the paint wash and then a couple other steps that I'm about to do, will just give it that aged patina. So you can see that I applied the paint wash and then I used a wet rag or a damp rag, and I'm just wiping it back so that it's not too thick and covering everything up. I still want the sanded distressed parts to show through the paint wash. When the paint wash was completely dry, I applied a clear wax, and I'm using the Magnolia Home Furniture Wax here. I applied this wax to the entire table. The next thing that I did was I applied some dark wax. This is Dark and Decrepit color of dark wax from the DIY paint line. And so I'm using this and just applying it mainly at the corners and the edges of the table to give it more of that patina I was going for. I applied the clear wax first so that I would have more control of this dark wax because I didn't want it to get too heavy. The next thing that I did was applied white wax mixed with just a little bit of white paint. I wanted a little bit more of the white to stick and adhere to give more texture and more of that, again, that patina that I was going for. So my ratio here was probably about 2 tablespoons of white wax with about a half a teaspoon of white paint. I worked in sections and did each side of the table one at a time. And so here I am applying the dark wax and then going back in with my white wax and white paint mixture. And I'm using paper towels and I'm just kind of sponging it on with a dry paper towel. And then I used a wet paper towel to just blend it in. And I did this over all of the table. So I did this on the skirt of the table, the legs, and then I moved on to the sides and the top of the table. On the top of the table, I focused more on the corners and the edges when applying the dark wax and when applying the white wax. Once I had all of my waxes applied and they were dried, then I took a little bit of this glaze and I'm adding it to some of my paint wash that I had left over, the darker paint wash, and I am mixing that up, and then I applied this glaze paint wash mix to the entire table. I used a paintbrush to apply the glaze, and then I used a damp rag to blend in all of the glaze and to catch any drips. On the tabletop, I brushed on this glaze and then I took my damp rag and I just sort of patted it all around to get rid of the brush strokes and to give it more of that aged look. This next little table that I worked on was a very quick project. It only took me about 10 minutes. I'm using Restore a Finish by Howard's, and you can see as I'm applying it here what a difference it makes. I'm just using a paper towel and rubbing it all over the tabletop, and I rubbed it all down the sides. Basically, I did the entire table with this. I didn't do anything else other than clean it before I applied, but what a difference this made. I didn't want to sand this table because it has some carving on the top of it, and I didn't want to remove that or sand it out, and so that's why I chose to use this Restore a Finish. Also, I've really been wanting to try it. Here you can see the difference between the side of the table that I applied it and the side that I didn't. I would highly recommend this if you have any furniture that you just need to remove some scratches. There was one watermark here, or white ring, that was in the middle of the table, and so I just lightly sanded it with a very fine grit sandpaper and then kept adding the Restore a Finish until it looked good and I got rid of most of that white ring. And so I think it turned out pretty good. If I focused only on the things that I didn't like about these tables, they'd still be the way they are. But when I focus on what they could be, when I look into what I can see it as, not what it is right now, then I know that I can turn it into something beautiful. It's the same thing with circumstances in my life. I can focus on the things that I don't like and what's not happening, or I can look at what could happen or how I would like things to be. And that's really what faith is. Faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. So be encouraged that no matter what your circumstance or your situation is, to keep looking for that light and to see the good and to continue to hope for it and to pray for it. You can find a link to the products that I used in this video in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching and for liking and subscribing to my channel. I appreciate every one of you. God bless.